Hi everyone, and welcome back out to Harvest Hills Ranch. Today we're going to be asking the question if we can use meats in our diet to correct micronutrient deficiencies. These are just simply deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, and I probably shouldn't just say simply because they have massive impacts on our overall metabolism and physiology. So we're going to take a look at that today, and I'm going to give you some insight into what foods can actually do, specifically what role meats can play in this. Hey, if you're new to the channel, thanks for dropping by today. I'm Dr. Arland Hill. I have a passion for nutrition. On this channel, we talk about all things nutrition, from the work that we do here on the farm, how that impacts the food that you and your family consume, and what that ultimately means to your health. So let's take a deeper dive into this conversation around what meat can do in terms of helping to repair micronutrient deficiencies. And to best understand this scenario, we have to understand what these micronutrient deficiencies are and what the reason that they're manifesting in the first place and why that is related to you. So micronutrients are going to be what I like to call metabolic spark plugs. They are, again, vitamins, minerals, metabolites, amino acids. It is the smallest component to which we think about nutrition, but which many of us have often heard about but may not have a full understanding of what their impact are. Well, when you look at these, any metabolic system throughout the body that is dependent on one of these nutrients, whether that means it is for a cofactor in an enzyme to keep that pathway or to keep a particular pathway in the body moving forward, whether it is serving some other type of role as an energy cofactor, regardless of what the role is, most people tend to notice over time when they start to develop or accumulate micronutrient deficiencies. Now, I want to share an example with you that is a case report out of my clinic. This is one that I saw just today. And I want to show you how this actually manifested. This is from an individual in his late 60s. And what we're going to see here are the multitude of micronutrient deficiencies that this individual has and why those are so relevant. So if you'll notice on this, we've got two categories here. We've got these functional and borderline deficiencies. And I want to point out a couple of deficiencies here that really stand out to speak to the bigger context of where this individual's overall health is at. So we're going to take a look at glutamine, glutathione, and panthenate. And these are going to be nutrients, especially with regards to the glutamine, that speak to the overall difference between this individual being able to repair and build their body up at a fast enough rate, what a lot of times we talk about as being anabolic, versus that individual being in a more catabolic state. Well, if that's going to be more breakdown tissues, you can think about that as a destructive state of physiology, a destructive metabolic activity. There's more destructive metabolic activity that's taking place, and that glutamine deficiency can be an indication of that. Panthenate, which is B5, can also be an indication of that as well. Now, one thing I want to show you in this is we have to ask the question of why is this manifesting in the first place, and do the nutrient deficiencies here seem to suggest any indication of why that's taken place? And indeed they do, and you'll notice here that this individual has not what we would look at maybe initially and think about as a deficiency in fructose. No, what this instead implies is that this individual does not have the ability to take fructose and efficiently use that as an energy source. Now, there's several implications that can come about as a byproduct of that. But ultimately, what this is implying to us is that without the ability to efficiently metabolize fructose, in this individual's case, he had consumed too much fructose for his metabolic needs. And we think about how that is metabolized differently than glucose, which is the predominant sugar that we find, or the monosaccharide, however you want to say that. We're just going to generically talk about that as a sugar for the moment, even though that's a little bit of a loose terminology for that. But with fructose being different than the glucose, fructose is metabolized differently. It has to go to the liver first to initially start being broken down before it can start to work its way into some of our energy production cycles. So it's altogether different. When we overconsume that, we start to increase inflammation at the cellular level. We can increase inflammation in tissues such as The liver is often well seen in this. And so the whole ability to be able to burn that as an energy source becomes dysfunctional. And so that turns into a big problem, because as a byproduct of that, we see that there's going to be an inflammatory process that manifests. Now, how can I show you evidence of that? Well, in this particular example, you'll see a couple of things. I'm going to point to 3 things here that illustrate this. The first of which is that we see deficiencies in glutamine and cysteine, and those are going to contribute to low levels of glutathione. Glutathione being a master antioxidant in the body, a very profound antioxidant. Maybe I shouldn't call it a master antioxidant, but it's a very profound antioxidant that has a lot of protective roles in the body. And then you'll also see here we have deficiencies in vitamin E. And vitamin E and glutathione, these are 2 nutrients that are very heavily found in the cell membranes. They're very concentrated in areas where we find fats. The membranes around the outside of our cells are fat. The membranes around the energy production areas of the mitochondria, these are made up of fat. And so we find these antioxidants in these areas trying to protect them. And therefore we can extrapolate that if those antioxidants are low, we're not going to see that same benefit. What else do we see contributing to this? Well, there's going to be an ability to look at the total antioxidant status for this patient, and notice that this individual's antioxidant status is starting to decline. And so this is looking at the ability of the cell to be able to protect itself. Ideally, I would want to see this number up around 66% or above. And then we also have a more classic marker here illustrative of inflammation, which is C-reactive protein. Typically, I want to see this somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 or less, and you can see we're over 10 times where we should be on that particular marker. So quite frankly, we're looking at this and thinking, this is an individual who has overconsumption of fructose, and as a byproduct of that, we've depleted the antioxidants, and we've also created a chronic inflammatory state on that. So now back to the original question with that prelude, which is, can meat, and in this conversation today, we're going to specifically focus on beef, and not just any beef, we're going to focus on grass-fed and finished beef. Can that serve a role in the micronutrient recovery plan? And let's take a look at what the evidence shows to be able to answer that question and have an understanding of what is actually found in these meat sources. So to answer this question for us, I'm going to take you over here to an article that is, or a journal article out of the Nutrition Journal that is illustrating a difference in antioxidant status between grass-fed and grain-fed beef. Now, it doesn't mean that grain-fed beef wouldn't have some of these nutrients potentially, but grass-fed is certainly going to have a higher contribution of these. And so in looking at this, we'll see that one of the statements that's been made in the abstract here is that several studies suggest that grass-based diets elevate precursors for vitamin A and vitamin E, and keep in mind vitamin E was one of these deficiencies that we saw, as well as cancer-fighting antioxidants such as glutathione and superoxide dismutase compared to grain-fed contemporaries. So let's make more sense of this. What this is saying is that if we go back to the deficiency profile that this individual had, where there were several antioxidants that were deficient, we see the glutathione and vitamin E. These were 2 antioxidants that were specifically stated as being higher in these grass-finished animals versus the grain-finished animals. And also when we look at meat in general, and when we're trying to think about how to shape our overall diet, if we're looking at this and we're looking at how to acquire or how to ingest the most biologically available proteins and amino acids in the diet, that is going to be done through meat. So for this individual, where we're looking at trying to replace the glutamine and the cysteine as precursors to glutathione, and we're also looking at trying to replace the serine. And interestingly enough, this individual also had a low trending B12, and we know that B12 is another nutrient that's going to be found in sufficient quantities in in our red meat sources, these are all going to be micronutrients that are going to be addressed through an inclusion in that food in the diet. And what was very interesting to me is when I made this recommendation to this patient, one of the comments that this patient immediately made back to me is, I have not had red meat in my diet for the last 3 months. My wife and I decided to take that out for a period of time, and this was ultimately one of the contributing factors, as I've deduced, for why we saw these precursors begin to drop in his micronutrient profile here, but also the reason that we saw the antioxidants drop. And I want to draw out one other component to this particular case that I think could be of benefit, or one of the reasons that consuming red meat and beef could be of benefit to him is that by doing that, that also increases satiety. And there are a number of mechanisms by which this can happen, not just from the protein, but also because of the fats in the diet, the fats and the fatty acids in this particular food source. They're going to have an impact on being able to promote satiety. And as a result of that, this is going to be a situation where that individual is less likely to consume fruit, or maybe better state, I shouldn't just say fruit, I should say fructose, foods high in fructose. And whether that's a high fructose corn syrup food, or whether it's alcohol, which is going to have a similar impact on affecting this, those foods are not going to promote satiety. They're not going to create that feeling of having consumed enough food, the same as the amino acids in this protein source, and the same as these fatty acids will. So that's at the core going to stop the impact and stop the inflammatory process, or be a mechanism for stopping that, or slowing it down at least, that is not being taken advantage of right now as this individual begins to incorporate back in that red meat into the diet. So to answer the question, can beef be used, and this would apply most likely to other red meats as well, other ruminant red meats. So we're thinking about things like bison, sheep, or lamb, goat. These are all going to have the same digestive characteristics that we're talking about with beef. And so we would expect that there would be some similarities. I think we need more evidence to validate that statement 100%, but it would be most likely that that's what we're going to anticipate seeing. And so would that help in promoting recovery of these micronutrients? Absolutely it would, and it's going to do it both directly and indirectly. It'll do it directly by providing those micronutrient precursors, getting those antioxidants back in a sufficient supply, but it'll also support it indirectly by reducing the oxidation that is coming as a byproduct of the fructose or fructose-like metabolized compounds that was going in through this individual's diet. So interesting, maybe that shifts some of the way you think about beef in your diet, and maybe that shifts some of the way you think about restoring some of your nutrients, or keeping your nutrient status high. Ultimately, we don't want to have to depend on digging ourselves out of a hole and having to constantly correct nutrient deficiencies. A better idea and a better thought process and way of following through on optimizing our health would be, once we've got that nutrient status up, how do we keep it up there by making the right dietary selections on an ongoing basis? So hope you found this insightful as always. Listen, if you are trying to figure out where to source and find grass-fed and finished beef, if you're looking for pastured poultry, free-range duck and chicken eggs, check out Harvest Hill's Ranch. That is the regenerative agriculture ranch that Leah and I operate, and we don't make any compromise in the way we manage our animals, and ultimately doing this with the intention of producing nutrition, not with the intention of simply producing commodities. If you're interested in looking at more of the work that I do on the clinic side and how I support my patients and incorporate in some of the things that we've been talking about here today, go to drarlandhill.com and you'll find more about the services that I offer and how we can support patients. So again, thanks for listening, guys. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care.